Good afternoon. It's Saturday, January 17th. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. The United States has condemned the International Criminal Court's decision to open a preliminary probe into possible war crimes committed by Israel against the Palestinians during last summer's Operation Protective Edge in Gaza. The ICC's prosecutor announced yesterday that she had opened the probe, adding that it may lead to a full investigation. The prosecutor's decision comes after the Palestinians formally joined the ICC earlier this month, allowing them to lodge complaints of war crimes and crimes against humanity against Israel. The U.S. State Department spokesman said that the U.S. strongly disagrees with the ICC prosecutor's action, adding that it is a tragic irony that Israel, which has withstood thousands of terrorist rockets fired at civilian neighborhoods, is being scrutinized by the ICC. The spokesman added that the place to resolve differences between the parties is through direct negotiations, not unilateral actions by either side. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman harshly criticized the ICC's announcement, calling it a scandalous decision whose only goal is to try and harm Israel's right to defend itself against terror. Israel will act in the international sphere to bring about the dismantling of the court, which represents hypocrisy and gives impetus to terrorism, he said. U.S. President Barack Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron have warned Congress not to trigger new sanctions against Iran over its nuclear program, saying such a move would upset diplomatic talks and potentially lead to war. In a joint news conference at the White House yesterday, Obama and Cameron urged members of Congress to be patient.
On Iran, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon. The best way to achieve that now is to create the space for negotiations to succeed. We should not impose further sanctions now. That would be counterproductive, and it could put at risk the valuable international unity that has been so crucial to our approach.
If Iran ends up ultimately not being able to say yes, if they cannot provide us the kind of assurances that would lead myself and David Cameron and others to conclude that they are not obtaining a nuclear weapon, then we're going to have to explore other options, and I will be the first one to come to Congress and say we need to tighten the screws. And I'm asking Congress to hold off because our negotiators, our partners, those who are most intimately involved in this, assess that it will jeopardize the possibility of resolving providing a diplomatic solution to one of the most difficult and long-lasting national security problems that we've faced in a very long time. And Congress needs to show patience. With respect to the veto, I said to my Democratic caucus colleagues yesterday that I will veto a bill that comes to my desk. And I will make this argument to the American people as to why I'm doing so. And I respectfully request them to hold off for a few months to see if we have the possibility of solving a big problem without resorting potentially to war.
The comments came as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry held bilateral talks with his Iranian counterpart for the second time this week, this time in Paris. The senior American diplomat and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif reportedly focused on further efforts to narrowing the remaining differences over an agreement to curb Tehran's atomic development program, seen as critical in reducing the risk of a wider Middle East war. The hour-long meeting in Paris follows up on a more lengthy meeting in Geneva on Wednesday. There are less than 2 months left before the self-imposed March 31st timeline calls for the sides to reach a framework accord that would set key parameters for the elusive final nuclear deal by June 30th. Protest graffiti was sprayed outside the French Cultural Center in Gaza before dawn today, following the publication of a new cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad by French satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo, where the staff was massacred by Islamic terrorists last week in Paris. "You will go to hell," read one of the slogans on the center, which has been closed since it was damaged in a fire last October. Large parts of the Muslim world erupted in anger over the weekend with protests against the latest Charlie Hebdo cover. The demonstrations devolved into riots in several cities from Senegal to Pakistan. At the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City, scores of Palestinians demonstrated after Friday prayers, with some of them setting fire to a French flag. The demonstrators also chanted slogans against PA President Mahmoud Abbas. One of the largest rallies in the Muslim world was in Amman, where some 2,500 protesters marched with banners that read, "Insulting the Prophet is global terrorism." Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel is calling for the implementation of heightened security measures throughout the European Union to combat the threats posed by Islamic radicals after they return home from fighting with extremist forces in the Middle East. He made the call after two gunmen who just returned from Syria were killed on Thursday when they opened fire at federal police with automatic weapons during a counter-terrorism operation in Verviers. 13 suspects detained during a nationwide crackdown on Islamic networks and dozens of other searches in Brussels and surrounding towns are now undergoing questioning. It was also announced that hundreds of troops are being progressively deployed to patrol the streets of the capital of Belgium, which is estimated to have the highest number of foreign fighters per capita in Europe to have joined Islamic forces in Syria and Iraq. Two other suspects are being held in France at Belgium's request, in addition to 12 others arrested by French police on suspicion they may have provided logistical support to the terrorists who carried out last week's attack in Paris. The Belgian Prime Minister is appealing for the EU to agree on concrete steps to bolster the bloc's defense against attacks from returning jihadis during its upcoming summit in February. In London, an 18-year-old British woman remains in police custody after being arrested at the Stansted airport on suspicion of preparing acts of terrorism and membership in a banned organization. The arrest is the latest in a series since the rising of the country's threat level in August because of risk posed by Islamic State fighters returning from Iraq and Syria. In the wake of the Paris terror attacks, police in Great Britain are going to step up security at Jewish areas in the country over the next several days. Britain's top counter-terrorism police officer announced that security forces will work with community leaders to most effectively increase their presence and patrols around synagogues and Jewish schools. An organization known as the Community Security Trust, or CST, advises Britain's estimated 260,000 Jews and published a statement yesterday cautioning British Jews not to panic.
In those communities, people will see more patrols. They'll see more patrols, particularly in areas where the Jewish community centres, if you like, and at sort of synagogues and at schools. And we'll be working on exactly the detail of that and how that best works with them and, say, local community leaders.
I would say we're not feeling vulnerable. I think we're very shaken by what's happened in Paris. And I know that there are members of the community, and there's conversation around there being some people who are more nervous than normal. So the Community Security Trust, which is the charity that for a long time has advised the Jewish community from within the Jewish community on security, wrote this week that they're getting more calls and nervousness from some members than ever. But they've written a statement today which is quite reassuring that basically says this is not a time for panic, it's a time for heightened awareness, but not to be running around and to be very scared. So I think there's kind of that tension between going on with regular life but being more aware than normal. I think that's where we're at.
In the war of words between Ankara and Jerusalem marking even further deterioration in bilateral relations, Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu repeated his allegation that Prime Minister Netanyahu is a terrorist. In an interview with Reuters, Davutoglu said that Netanyahu himself killed and his army killed children in the playground, as well as all of the Turks and an American citizen in international waters, in reference to the 2010 Mavi Marmara incident. He went on to say that it is virtually impossible to eradicate extremist groups in the Middle East or have peace without the establishment of a Palestinian state. He accused the Israeli government of contributing to radicalization in the Muslim world with provocations, such as the bombardment of Gaza during this past summer's conflict with Hamas, as well as the closure of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound out of security concerns during the recent wave of Muslim violence.
This is a terrorism. Nobody can argue about Israel's aggression in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa, a holy site for Muslims. In fact, these provocations create frustration in the Muslim world and becoming one of the reasons why these radical trends are emerging. Without solving Palestinian question, it is difficult to have peace in the Middle East.
During the same interview, Dotulu warned the international community against focusing solely on efforts to combat Islamic State forces to end the conflict in Syria. He said the brutality of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was the root cause of the war and the flood of refugees into Turkey. Dotulu has called for the establishment of an internationally policed no-fly zone around the northern city of Aleppo to protect civilians from regime forces and prevent a renewed flood of refugees if the city is not defended.
No-fly zone or exclusive air zone, you can use any term, so that Aleppo will be protected at least against the air bombardment, and there will be no new refugees coming to Turkey. In September, in 3 days, we received 197,000 refugees from Kobani.
Veteran CNN international correspondent Jim Clancy is leaving the network following an angry argument with his pro-Israeli activists on his Twitter account. Clancy posted comments defending the publishing of caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad by Charlie Hebdo and a Danish newspaper in 2005, prompting Oren Kessler of the Washington, D.C.-based Foundation for the Defense of Democracies to take issue with his statements. The discussion then deteriorated rapidly when Clancy accused the Jewish respondents of engaging in Hasbara, the Hebrew word for pro-Israel propaganda, and for attempting to promote an anti-Muslim agenda. He faced fierce criticism from Jewish groups as well as a disability charity when Clancy asked the activists to leave him alone because it was his Friday night and that you and the Hasbara team need to pick on some cripple on the edge of the herd. Clancy reported for CNN for 34 years and has removed his Twitter account that had 57,000 followers. During an interview with NBC about reaction from the French Jewish community in the aftermath of the Paris terror attacks, Ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer expressed his hope that those who decide to remain in Europe will feel protected by the government.
We have been shocked, as the world has, by the events in Paris and the attack on the Jewish community. This comes after Jews have been emigrating from France in record numbers this past year to Israel. What do you perceive the situation right now?
Well, as you said, it's been happening now for a few years. You've had attacks on Jews in France. So it's not something that's new. This is just sort of another level of attack against the Jews of France. 3 years ago, we had 1,900 French Jews that moved to Israel. 2 years ago, it was 3,500. Last year, it was 7,000. And this year, we're expecting maybe 15,000. French Jews. Now, that's about 2.5% of the French population. In American terms, it would be about 150,000 American Jews all of a sudden in the year deciding to come to Israel. So obviously, French Jewry feels that it's under siege. I think it was very important for the French president to speak out against it. I think it was important for him to go to that synagogue, as he did, following the attack and following that mass demonstration and solidarity, that he stood in solidarity with the French Jewish community. But the French Jewish community is very concerned, and people should know that Israel is a home for Jews everywhere who are concerned for their security and their safety, and that's something the Prime Minister expressed.
There was a very striking comment on our air 2 nights ago on NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams from the leader of the French Jewish community, saying that during the years leading up to the Holocaust, that pessimists went to New York, optimists went to Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, the purpose of Israel is to ensure that there's a refuge for Jews everywhere. One question, Andrea, no one is asking themselves today: where are those French Jews going to go? They have a right to go to Israel. They're free to go to Israel. We hope that the Jewish community, those Jews who decide to stay in France, will be protected by that government. But everyone should know that any Jew in the world who feels threatened will always have a home in Israel. They won't have to allow and rely on others to defend them. In Israel, the Jewish people defend themselves.
There was a comment today by the Iranian foreign minister in Geneva waiting for a key meeting on the nuclear issue with John Kerry. And he was asked about the cover with the Prophet Muhammad on the cover of the new issue of Charlie Hebdo. This is what Mr. Zarif said.
Unless we learn to respect one another, it will be very difficult in a world of different views and different cultures and civilizations. We won't be able to engage in a serious dialogue if we start disrespecting each other's values and sanctities.
This is very complicated because any portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad is blasphemous, disrespectful to Muslims around the world, and there is also the issue of freedom of the press, freedom of expression.
Well, I would hope that the foreign minister of Iran would use the soundbite opportunity that he had to speak out against the murder of these cartoonists and Jews in France. That didn't happen. This same foreign minister of Iran that is now talking about respecting others, he laid a wreath last year at the grave of Imad Muniyeh, who is a man responsible for killing more Americans than any other person besides Osama bin Laden over the last 50 years. He's the man responsible for the murder of those 241 Marines in Lebanon. That's what the foreign minister, those are the values of the foreign minister of Iran, to lay a wreath at the grave of a mass murderer. So I don't expect him to be part of the solution. He's part of the problem.
There's a new al-Qaeda claim of responsibility for the attack on Charlie Hebdo and a new ISIS video as well. Reactions to that today?
Well, I think we have to understand that this is a much broader struggle. The mistake would be to look at different organizations and different groups, Boko Haram in Nigeria, and al-Qaeda in different parts of the Middle East, or ISIS, or Hamas, or Hezbollah, or the Mahdi army, the Shia militias, or Iran, to see them as all separate and they're all driven by local grievances. The truth is they're all part of a much broader fanaticism that we have to defend our civilization against. And Israel, my country, actually stands on the front lines against this fanaticism. And the mistake that a lot of people make is to try to understand and try to explain it. We have to stand in solidarity, as you saw in Paris, against this and say nothing justifies terrorism, nothing justifies this violence.
Diplomatic relations with Stockholm are also in a tailspin, with Swedish Foreign Minister Margot Wallström saying that Israel has irritated close allies by overreacting to Stockholm, recognizing the state of Palestine. Wallström said the rhetoric of Israeli officials over the issue has crossed all limits. Israel said the Swedish move was ill-considered and would not contribute to peace, and recalled its ambassador for discussions. The U.S. has also said recognition was premature. Wallström had been scheduled to arrive here this month to attend a memorial service for the Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg, who saved Jews during the Holocaust. However, her visit was cancelled when Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman announced that he would boycott her. Israel Lands Authority Director Benzi Lieberman has been named as the official questioned in the corruption probe into the governmental body, and Nachum Lugenthal as the former MK who was also arrested in the affair. Both were released to 5 days house arrest after being questioned yesterday. Lieberman is suspected of using his position at the authority to sell property for a major profit to a real estate company, where Langenthal, a former National Religious Party MK, is a senior board member. Several investigators of the National Fraud Squad served a warrant to the Land Authority office to produce documents. Lieberman resigned earlier this week from his position. Turning now to the Cholot detention facility in the Negev, and the state has promised that the 2,200 migrants being held will now receive heating in their cells. The decision was given to the High Court of Justice after a number of human rights groups petitioned the Supreme Court over complaints of bitter cold in the facility. The prison service had said that the space heaters in the rooms weren't allowed because they were a safety hazard, but that the main areas were always heated. Now they say they have found a way to make heaters in the cells safe. In the Bedouin town of Rahat, hundreds of protesters demonstrated the death of Sami El-Jar, a 20-year-old resident of the town. He was shot to death late Wednesday during an attempt to arrest drug dealers, which led to rioting and attacks on police. Participating in that protest were a number of Arab Knesset members. Police say the cops fired into the air, but it is unknown who shot the man. The Justice Ministry has launched a probe into the incident. Nonsensical and absurd were the words used by Argentine government officials to describe the accusations that President Cristina Fernandez had attempted to whitewash investigations into the 1994 bombings of the AMIA Jewish Center in Buenos Aires, which killed 85 people. State Prosecutor Alberto Nisman said earlier this week that he had issued a request that a judge interrogate Fernandez and Foreign Minister Hector Timerman for being accomplices of an aggravated cover-up and obstruction of justice regarding the Iranians accused of the AMIA terrorist attacks. Fernandez's chief of the cabinet ministers, Jorge Capitanich, dismissed Nisman's charges as ridiculous, speaking on behalf of several government officials. Turning to arts, entertainment, and the nomination of an Israeli film in the Best Live Action Short category for the 2015 Academy Awards. Aya was directed, written, and produced by 3 graduates of the Sam Spiegel Film and Television School here in Jerusalem. The 39-minute film portrays the deep relationship that develops between a Scandinavian music critic and an Israeli driver who picks him up at the airport. It was directed by Oded Ben-Nun and Michal Brezis and was produced by Israeli actress Yael Abakassis. It stars Israeli-French actress Sarah Adler and Danish actor Ulrich Thompson. Ada will compete against 4 other films in the same category at this year's Academy Awards, held on February 22nd. Talk about falling asleep on the job. 3 female rhinos from the Ramat Gan safari escaped through a side gate after one of the security guards dozed off. When the rhinos arrived at the parking lot, they were spotted by passers-by who called the police. The authorities, and they alerted the safari, and the manager rushed to the site and drove the rhinos back by clapping his hands. The safari spokeswoman said that the guard who fell asleep was fired. Well, rhinos may be running wild, but inflation is not. The annual inflation was negative for Israel for the first time in 8 years and would have fallen even more sharply if it hadn't been for a sharp rise in housing prices. The Central Bureau of Statistics announced that inflation fell to 0.2% for 2014, compared with a 1.8% rise last year and a recent high of 3.9% in 2009. While consumers may celebrate lower prices at the grocery store and elsewhere, for policymakers it's normally a worrisome sign that the economy is in distress, threatening to deter consumer spending as people hold off purchases, hoping prices will further fall. Turning to the weather, and the forecast is for partly cloudy skies with slightly warmer temperatures. Here's a look at the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. Well, that's all for this edition of IBA News. Please join us again tomorrow when I'll be at this desk to bring you the latest news from Israel. Till then, have a pleasant week and shalom from Jerusalem.